Hello and welcome to part 2 of tutorial 13 radars in this tutorial series. In this video we'll go through a visual demonstration of a few different topics that we've covered in part 1, which was largely theory based on how radars work within Nebulous Fleet Command. So first let's have a look at radar panel coverage. So we have my Rains class frigate in the middle, which will destroy one of its panels. We have 4 corvettes spaced on the same plane as the Rains, each at 1,000 meters. We have 2 corvettes above and below at 1,000 meters, and we have 2 corvettes orbiting on horizontal planes in 2 different directions to show, as we knock out one of the panels, where we'll be able to see or not see particular objects. So just to refresh, radars are contained within the ship, but the radar panels are what provide coverage for the radar to see out of. And so when one of these panels is destroyed or damaged, you actually lose the ability to see from that part of the ship. Now, my understanding is that it's sort of, you can cut it down the middle and then cut it down the side, and therefore you have like a 90-degree coverage from that panel. Then on one side, that's 180 degrees, 270, and then 360. Now, it's important to note that different ships have different panel placements. So we can see here that the light cruiser has its panels separated differently. So does the heavy cruiser, and as well as the light cruiser. However, it should also follow the same principles of down the side and down the top, providing that 45-degree view from that radar. Noting that the battleship actually has 8 panels as opposed to 4, so it has a little bit of extra redundancy. So if we jump back to the Rains class frigate, if I was to turn on all of the information, here we can see all the different tracks as they move around, noting that we have the radar on. If I was to turn the radar off, not only do we lose all the tracks, but because they're within visual, we maintain a visual view of that. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to destroy this panel here using one of the other Rains class frigates with its gun, and we'll see what it looks like once the radar panel has been destroyed. So just noting, at the moment I can see everything from the top to the sides and to the orbiting ships. So now that we've destroyed one panel, and we can see that because one of the bullet holes, 2 is playing the destroyed animation, as well as that the top left panel has been destroyed. We've got one that's also slightly damaged because of the over penetration that came out through here. However, at the end of the day, we've lost one and the other 3 are working. Now we can see that initially the first 4 that are on the same plane as the ANZ brood have not been impacted, so we are still detecting them via radar, and that's likely because the 45 degrees here is allowing it to be picked up by the bottom one. If I was to move this ship slightly higher than the 45 degrees and make sure it's just in line with the Rains, then we should expect it to disappear. So see how it's now disappeared off the radar track, and we can confirm by selecting ANZ brood that the radar track has now gone from the radar with the positional and the velocity errors to visual, which is the backup when we don't have the radar. So if I was to move it back down, if I moved it back below the horizontal, it turns back into a radar track. So then that's where it'll be detected by this panel. Now, when we look at the top and the bottom tracks, we can see the bottom one because the 2 bottom panels are working. The brace of bell is not being detected because the 90 degrees straight up. This is more on the top left quadrant as opposed to the top right. So again, if I was to move it slightly across, it goes from visual back into radar, showing that it's now being picked up on the top right. And if I was to move it back,
how can we help today, Commander?
It switches back into visual around that 45 degree. This is further shown by the 2 orbiting tracks. Here you can see that they are both being tracked by radar. However, as they cross into the top left quadrant, they both disappear off the radar network, again turning into visual tracks. And then as they cross the various 90-degree angles, they'll reacquire as a radar track by a different panel. So that's just a quick visualization on how the radar panels work and the coverage. If I was to destroy another panel, I could completely blind on the left-hand side or the right-hand side. Noting that this ship is able to receive communications. However, the other two ships had their radars and communications off, so we're unable to provide tracks. If we were to turn on the radars for the other ships and this could receive, then we would expect that we would be able to see these two ships here. So just to recap, radar panels are what give you the vision from that side of the ship, with the radar calculations being conducted internally. You can draw a line down the side and a line down the top, and that provides you the quadrant. When a ship passes through one of those quadrants, as you can see is occurring here, it transitions from a visual, because it's so close, into a radar track. And when a ship moves into a quadrant where the radar panel is destroyed, then it becomes a visual track. If it's close enough or if it's far enough away, it will become, it'll simply disappear off the track. So maintaining radar panels either through your current ship, if it's a lone ship, or if it is if you're in a fleet, you can have your transmission, your communications enabled, enabling radar to be sent via communications to cover your blind spots. All right, so let's now test the different radars at different ranges using 3 fleets. One, we'll have my fleet, which will have the radars, all testing it from the same position. We'll have another fleet, which will have the max radar cross-section, and then another fleet where we'll have an angled radar cross-section. We just go through the ships really quickly. We will have a Frontline, a Parallax, and a Spyglass. And then we will also have the Frontline, a Parallax, and Spyglass with an adaptive radar receiver, which will enable us to see a little bit further, or detect a little bit, it'll enable us to detect a little bit closer. And we'll primarily use that on the Corvette and the Frigate, as they will be the ones that we'll see closest in. We'll also have a radar range marker, so I'll position that one on the screen so that we can see what the maximum radar range is. So the blue line is where the radar goes out to, and so that's what we'll be using to mark the extremities. And then we'll have a spotter for any other ship that I need to move around or anything like that. We'll also reset all the radars so that they are sitting just outside the withdrawal line on the map shooting gallery. In the red, we will then have one of each of the hull classes. So for each of the ships in red, they'll have their hull designation as the battleship, and then they'll also have what they're for. So this is the max RCS. So using the 3D charts from the wiki, we will angle these so that we can get the maximum RCS, which is generally on the side or from the top. For the Corvette in particular, its smallest RCS is currently sort of across the front. So we'll have the Corvette positioned in a way so that we'll get its maximum RCS, pretending that there was a pinard underneath. And then in green, we'll have the ships, again, one of each of the hulls will be used to show what the various different hulls look like when they are angled, so that we start to reduce the radar cross section, and therefore we can have a comparison between angled and the maximum as we visualize the difference between the two. So as we go down, we'll have one for each hull, but we'll have 2 for the frigate and for the Corvette, as these will have the adaptive radar receivers, so that way you can see how much closer we can detect something with an adaptive radar receiver using the 2 adaptive radar receiver ships that I have in my radar fleet. So I expect that these will be positioned in a way that they are closer than the other 2, which are just the normal angled Corvettes. In this case, the Corvette will just have a side-on position, as that will be its smallest RCS, as opposed to having its big flat angled side. Methodology for this testing will be quite simple. Radar ships will remain in place. For all the ships that are not being tested, they'll have their radar and their communications off, so that we are not interfering with the tests. We'll have the maximum range radar spotting ship, or the range marker ship, on the extremity of the radar's potential range, which will be the blue line. And then from that blue line, we will progressively move ships in until we receive a track, starting with the red fleet first being the max RCS, followed by the green fleet, the minimum or angled RCS. And what we'll do is, as they are positioned, we will keep moving them past the range marker until such time that we see a track, which is at that point they are identifiable from one of the radar ships. I'll continue to move it backwards and forwards until I roughly get into position. Now, is this a 100% accurate test? No, it is not. As ships rotate and change, their RCS will change over time. So just because they're side on here, if they start to rotate, something may pop in or pop out. So this is sort of just the best guess. Noting again that this is just a simple test from a line of sight, most of it being on the same plane. If you then start to play a real game and you have multiple radars, radar 1, which may be here, may not see something, but radar 2, maybe over here, would definitely be able to see it because of the different angles and the way the radar calculation works. And this is just meant to provide a guide as to what you might roughly see as opposed to what you would 100% see. All right, so let's get into testing.
Send traffic. Send traffic.
So now that we've positioned all our ships, we can see that from the initial front line to the radar range marker, we roughly have things in a straight line. However, this is at the detection range, so even though it may not be necessarily straight, I have moved it around until a position where even the angles shouldn't provide too much of a difference. However, it could be 100 meters either way. So let's have a look at the results. First of all, the max battleship is out to 8,000 meters with the largest radar cross section of the game. That makes sense. However, when we angle it, we save about 300 meters. So even with the angle on your guns, you may be able to get a little bit closer, but we can anticipate that a Frontline is basically going to see a battleship at its max range. The heavy cruiser can be spotted at 7,500 meters, so 500 meters shorter than the max range of the Frontline. However, when we start to angle it, that comes down to 6,400. So we save about 1,300 meters between the heavy cruiser being on its side-on position, and if we start to angle it. The light cruiser likewise is at about 7,200 meters, but angled comes down to 6,000. So it almost seems at the moment that the rule of thumb is about 1,000 meters, that you can save about 1,000 meters in detection range if you angle on the approach. A Keystone destroyer at 6,400 and an angled one at 5,500. The frigate at 5,800. And then an angled frigate at 4,900. So about 800 meters there. 900 meters there. Sorry, the max corvette, which would be in the pinard position, being about 5,100 meters as opposed to 4,600. So the closest that you're likely to see any ship from the front line ranges between the 4,600 meters from an angled corvette all the way out to the battleship at 8,000 meters. The other thing we've got to show is how the adaptive radar receiver allows you to see things at a longer range. So by increasing the sensitivity and lowering the noise floor, we're able to see smaller objects at a further distance. However, it comes at a negative positional and velocity error. So here we can see I've now turned off the frontline radar and I have turned on the adaptive radar receiver that is plugged into a frontline. And that's our original corvette and frigate, which are both angled. I've tried to match the angles here, although probably slightly off. A frigate would normally be seen at about the 4,900 meter mark. However, it is now seen out at 6,300 meters. So an additional 1,200 meters being spotted is quite a difference. And if we have a look at the frigate being by far the smallest at 4,500 meters, we can now see it's at 5,000. So we actually gain 1,000 meters in spotting with the adaptive radar receiver plugged in. And you can see here that the maximum range of the maximum RCS corvette is seen at 5,000 meters. So we can actually see an angled corvette even further out now by another 400. And if we were to change that and rotate it into its worst position, I imagine we would probably see it even further out, maybe out at the 6,000 meter mark. So that there is the frontline radar and the frontline with the adaptive radar receiver and what ranges you expect to see the various different ships. And I'll put them on the screen now so that you can either take a snapshot and see the results or have a bit of a handy guide next to you for the Frontline radar. So let's have a look now at the results of the Parallax. And the Parallax again has its radar on, its communications off, and we've made sure that all the other ships here aren't having their signature size incidentally increased by proximity. So that's why some are higher or lower than others. Now we've got our range marker marked out to 9,500 meters, which is the range of a Parallax. So let's start up the top. The first thing here is a lot of them are around that 9,500 meter mark, regardless of whether they're angled or max RCS. So if we have a look, the battleship is at 9,400 meters, so basically 9,500. So is the heavy cruiser and the light cruiser. So basically for Parallaxes, you're going to see the larger ships from the cruiser family upwards, basically at max range. The angled battleship, it again, regardless of how I tried to position it, it will be seen at max range, with the heavy cruiser only having a couple extra 100 meters on its non-angled counterpart. The light cruiser, however, was a little bit better. You can see here that the at 8,700 meters, so by angling a light cruiser, if it's being detected by a Parallax, you're going to save about 800 meters, which is not too bad. But again, you're going to see this fairly early on. The destroyer here out at just under 9,000 meters, so again, pretty much almost max range for the Parallax. 9,000, 9,500 is not too much of a distance. It's really only a couple seconds depending on the speed of the craft. However, by angling your destroyer at that sort of 45-degree roll and sort of heading down, you are able to save about 800 meters there. With the reins, again, out to 8,000 meters, if you have a ship out there, you're going to be able to see it fairly well. 8,000 meters is nothing to be coughed at. However, again, the angled version is always better, coming in at around that 7,000 meters. So you get about a 1,000 meter saving, again, on most of these ships, or on some of these ships, I should say. We'll do a bit of analysis at the end, but 1,000 meters, whether it's angled or non-angled. And then for the Pinard positioned Corvette, it's 7,200, and for an angled Corvette, 6,700. So you get about 200 meters there. You get about 700 meters there. So you get about 700 meters there, which is not too bad. So from what I can see, with an unmodified Parallax, you're going to see about you're going to see a Corvette at its sort of smallest at around that 6,700 meter mark, and then all these ships, largely all the capital ships all the larger hulls and from the destroyer upwards, from that 9,000 meters out to the 9,500. So if I was to turn the Parallax off now, and we turned on our Parallax with the adaptive radar receiver, we are going to move the frigate into position and the Corvette.
Standing by. We're reading you.
And so once again, the Parallax with the adaptive radar receiver, if you would normally see your frigates out at that 7,200 meter mark, you are now seeing them around the 7,700. And if you were to see your Corvettes at around the 6,700 meter mark, just make sure I'm being accurate. 6,700, 6,800 meter mark, then you'll now see them around the 7,200. So again, so in this case, with the adaptive radar receiver, you'll see the Corvettes around the same spot, and you'll sort of see the frigates halfway between their minimum, their angled, and their maximum RCS. And we'll put all these up in numbers with a bit of an analysis at the end. So with that, we've now completed our Parallax testing, and you can see from the 9,500 down to that 7.2 for the angled, and then roughly the 6.7 out to the 9.5 for the angled. So once again, we've set up our test. We are now on the Spyglass. Everything else is off.
Ready.
Quiet. Commands on the line.
Receiving.
And we have our radar range marker set out to just over 11,500 meters, which is the maximum range of a Spyglass. So again, we're able to quickly see the fact that the three larger ships, the battleship, the heavy cruiser, and the light cruiser, are all identified out at that 11,500 meter mark, meaning with a Spyglass, you're going to be able to see everything straight away. And then the destroyer, once again, is slightly in, this time of only 700 meters. So you're going to see destroyers at their max RCS regardless. The battleship and the heavy cruiser are really, regardless of angle, you're going to see them. So basically, you'll always spot a battleship and you'll pretty much quickly spot a heavy cruiser. The light cruiser was a little bit more redeeming with that at that 1,000 meters reduction with its angle. So sort of no surprises there. With our frigate, so with your destroyer, out to 10,800 here, but when we angle it down to 9.5, so 700 more meters, still far enough out that you'll be able to spot beams. However, you probably, at this range, you're not going to be able to spot corvettes. At this range, you're not going to be able to spot any sort of rails. The rails will be able to get your scout if they can get visual on it. So with the reins, you'll see this out to 9,700 meters. So if anyone's put a Parallax on a frigate, you will see it first with just a unmodified Spyglass. Or if you see it, particularly if there's any sort of missile frigates out there. Again, angling it saves about 1,300 meters by the looks of it, which is nothing to be sniffed at, but you're going to see it a lot earlier. And again, pinard corvettes, you'll see them at 8,700 with the angled corvettes. Sorry if you hear any birds, are coming down to 8,000. So for a Spyglass, basically from the 8,000 meters to the 11,000 meters is really where you're going to start to see everything. So from there, 8,300 out to 11.5, which is pretty good. So if you've got a Spyglass, you're going to be able to move all your ships with front lines under the cover of that vision. Then as your front lines start to push out that envelope, you'll then be able to start to see more and more. So what does it look like with the adaptive radar receiver? So let's come to our two additional ships here. I'm going to turn off the Spyglass.
We're standing by.
Yes, Commander.
Standing by.
What are our orders?
And I'm going to turn on our Spyglass with the adaptive radar receiver. Now, from last time, I imagine we'll see the frigate about halfway, and we'll put the corvette in line there. We're now looking for ship number 8.
We hear you, Command. Yes, Commander.
All right, so I was almost bang on with the frigate.
Awaiting your orders, Commander. Yes, Commander. What are our orders?
And the corvette.
Commander?
Again, you'll be able to see a frigate with an adaptive radar receiver at halfway between the max RCS and the angled version. So now coming in at around 9,300, 9,200, as opposed to, if anything, it's worth probably taking an adaptive radar receiver on something, particularly with a Spyglass. You'll be able to see everything a lot further. Being able to see corvettes out at that 8,700 meter mark, even though it's only a few extra 100 meters, is definitely worth the investment. As missiles out this, you're taking up over half a missile's range at that 14,000 meters. You'll be able to spot and have the most amount of time to deal with a corvette swarm. If you have anything such as a rail destroyers, you'll probably see them back about here-ish, maybe, just going on everything else that we've seen so far. So, and then you'll be able to see all of the larger ships just straight away, as always. So I would also imagine you would see these destroyers out to the maximum range. You'd see light cruisers out to the maximum range. So just a bit of an analysis at the end now that we've got all the different ranges. So one thing is that the battleships and the heavy cruisers, you're likely to see them at the max range of your radar, regardless of what radar type you take. So it's definitely worth taking either a Parallax or a Spyglass to provide that further detection range. So you can see these types as far as possible, particularly for things such as rail battleships or rail destroyers, or basically anything with rails that you really want to detect as far out as possible. So we can summarize the general spotting ranges for each of the radars. So you're having a Frontline between 4,500 and 8,000, the Parallax between 6,700 and 9,500, and the Spyglass being 8,100 to 11,500 meters. So what does this mean? Well, if you're taking a Frontline radar on a larger ship, you're going to be able to see larger ships out at the same distance. However, you're going to see those smaller ships, such as corvettes, which can be a main threat if armed with a lot of missiles or torpedoes, very, very close in. And that's something you need to be aware of, as a larger ship, particularly without support, can easily be overwhelmed. And at 4,500 meters, you don't have a lot of time to react before corvettes close and start to get within torpedo range. And at 4,500 meters, you're going to, that's certainly within missile range. Parallax radars, 6,700, 9,500, is a respectable range for most things and gives you a bit of time to react. However, the Spyglass is effectively the gold standard in terms of spotting. It'll allow you to have the most amount of time to react and to see the longer range weapons. So if you detect anything with a Spyglass, anything with a 450mm cannon or a railgun, you'll be able to see. You'll be able to see a beam destroyer fleet before that's out in the open. You'll be able to see a beam destroyer fleet that's out in the open before it comes too close into range, being I think around that 6 kilometer mark. And you'll be able to spot any corvettes at that longer range, where you'll be able to start picking them off if you or your team members will be able to start picking them off if they're armed with the torpedoes or a significant amount of missiles. Other things that I've seen is that the adaptive radar receivers do make a difference, particularly on the Frontline, where you get a 23% increase in your ability to detect at a further range. And then for the Parallax and the Spyglass, you get about 8% each from the figures that I've captured in the previous tables. So for your Frontline, you'll be able to see an angled corvette or frigate around the 4,500 and 5,000 meter mark respectively, and you now bump that up to 5,500 meters and 5,500 meters and 6,300 meters with an adaptive radar receiver. So if you are on a larger ship and you have the ability to take one of these, it might be worthwhile, but noting that it has such a large positional and velocity error, unless you've got a bullseye to compensate or something like that, it's probably not worth taking the debuff and instead having your teammate spot for you, or having a dedicated spotting ship to provide that vision for you. So on an adaptive radar receiver on a Frontline, it's not really worth it. However, on a Parallax and a Spyglass, it does give you a little bit more time, with the best being on the Spyglass because it already has the furthest ability to detect. So if we were to look at the Parallax and the Spyglass detecting an angled corvette with an adaptive radar receiver, you go from 7,200 meters with that modified Parallax up to 8,750 with a modified Spyglass. So and certainly worth the investment on a dedicated spotting ship. Likewise, if you were to compare the Frontline and the Spyglass side by side, the Frontline even at its best at 8,000 meters, when you really start detecting that battleship, you're already going to be able to see a corvette. So a dedicated Spyglass is probably worthwhile. However, it is a points cost that you need to then obviously invest in if you take an adaptive radar receiver to get that further vision. It's some and defense for that ship. By being able to see such a long way away, it's probably something that you want to take in the future, so that you have that vision and you can make the decisions a little bit faster than your enemy. Other than that, you now have all the numbers that I have. It's been interesting to conduct this test. It is by no means the most accurate test. However, it does give you that one visualization of how the radar cross-section or the RCS of a ship can modify the detection threshold by radar. So you can now take away some of these numbers to do your own calculations, draw your own insights from them, or I'll recreate this test to see, you know, how much more you can improve by adding multiple radar receivers, or how a prowler drive comes into effect with its ability to reduce by minus 25% RCS, and then go from there. So I hope this has been useful, and you can now take some of this information into the games you play, as well as the ships that you build. So if you have any questions, put them down into the comments below. Otherwise, take care and have a good day.